So I was gardening this week, something new in my life. I've really never been a gardener, but all of a sudden I'm a gardener out there in the garden. And it got me thinking about last year when I was gardening and how much I worked at pulling out all the weeds. And how a lot of them, as I was pulling them out, you all know that snapping sound when you know you didn't get it all and it's going to grow back. Well, this year, I decided to see what these weeds actually were and let some of them grow. And what I discovered was they're flowers. They're beautiful flowers. Now, I went out to a store and got myself $100 worth of perennials and planted them, pulling weeds, not knowing that I was pulling other flowers that were perennials. So I let some of these flowers grow, and that got me thinking about weeds. And I'm thinking, what are weeds? Why do we call these beautiful flowers weeds? And so I looked it up, and it said a weed is a plant that's hardy, resilient, and grows where a human doesn't want it to. And that really got me thinking. And then I started thinking about history, which I love to look at, and I started thinking how the pagans in the early days of Christianity did everything they could to weed out the Christians. Christians turned out to be pretty hardy and resilient. So 1,000 years later, the Christians decided to weed out the pagans. Pagans did not turn out to be as hardy and resilient. The Sunnis keep trying to weed out the Shiites. The Shiites keep trying to weed out the Sunnis. Hitler and lots of folks before them have been trying to weed out the Jews, but they turned out to be very hardy and resilient themselves. So now they're trying to weed out the Palestinians. And there are lots of examples throughout history of weeding. And so that got me thinking about, since that's what's happening out here, what's happening in here? What are we doing in terms of weeding for ourselves? And so the first thing that came to mind was that critical voice, the critic. Or am I the only one who's got one? Right? Maybe. And how we're constantly trying to weed out this critic. Well, I was lucky enough in ministerial school to take a class where the teacher said, why don't you become friends with that critic and see what happens then? And so we went through an exercise that took several weeks to where finally I found myself face to face with my critic in meditation and during this exercise. And I asked it what it needed. And it said to me, I need to be heard before you do something stupid. And I said, okay, I'm willing to have that agreement with you that I listen to you first, but I am not agreeing to always listen to you because I like doing something stupid once in a while. And my critic and I came to this agreement. Now, this is over a decade ago. Since then, I have become friends with this voice that can really keep me out of a lot of trouble when I listen. And I realized for myself this week that that was the flower. Here I've been thinking about this critic voice as a weed, trying to pull it out, get it out of me. I don't like that voice. And once I became friends with it, it changed into something beautiful. So when I first arrived here a year and a half ago, it was middle of winter, and it looked like the river was frozen. And I had seen some footsteps out on the frozen river, and being that kind of guy, I was like, I'm going to go do that. But because I had this agreement, that little voice said, you know, if you die in your first 2 weeks here, that's not going to be very good for the community. I decided to listen. And here I am. That voice isn't so bad. And so I was looking at that, and I was seeing, look at this. Look at how I turned this weed into something beautiful in myself, and how often we don't do that. We're constantly fighting, trying to weed out those parts of ourselves we don't like, right? Or am I the only one? Yeah. Now, I probably am one of the leaders of doing something stupid. You know, so I will take that. But now that I got this voice, it doesn't happen as often, or at least doesn't happen as dangerously as it used to. Because I still like taking those kinds of chances, but I listen to that voice at least a little, and it, you know, curves it just a touch. Enough so I keep getting to show up on Sunday. So after that class, this is, again, a little over a decade ago, the next thing I thought about was my anger. There are people in my life when I was younger who were very clear that I had anger issues. The way I would outburst, the way I'd get really upset and angry and blast folks with it. And I didn't like that about myself. I wanted to weed that out of me. But because of the process I had gone through with the critic, I thought, what if I can just make friends with it? What would happen then? And so I began this process for myself of getting to know my anger. And I learned a couple of things. I learned that my anger is passion done badly. And what my anger is passionate about is protecting me from protecting my wounds and caring about me getting my needs met. My anger is very passionate about those two things. Maybe yours is too. And so I began a practice of whenever I would feel that anger starting to come up, to begin speaking to the passion about it. To learning, was this about that my feelings got hurt, so this was about a wound, or were my needs not getting met? And then once I knew that, so that was the first practice, right? Because one of the things I've noticed is sometimes we throw together a whole bunch of practices that are actually separate practices, and by throwing them all together, we don't get really good at it. It's too complicated. But by breaking them down to these smaller practices, recognizing the different practices that they are, this is for me, this is what I've learned about this. It has been easier for me to then be with it and make the kind of changes I want to make in my life in a way that works. But the thing about practice, when you first start out on something, is you're not good at it. Right? You try to practice something like standing up for yourself or shifting your anger into the good flower of passion that it is. You're not going to be good at it. You know, anybody who's had a kid who took violin lessons knows exactly what I'm talking about. It takes practice, and because you're not good at it, people aren't going to recognize your progress at first. And so I remember 10 years ago when I was explaining to Ash the process I was doing around my anger, she was just like, "It's not working." Because when you first start off, it looks that way. But I kept at it, and I kept at it, making friends instead of weeding. And all of a sudden, things did start to shift where even Ash could notice. Certainly my son noticed. Certainly everybody else who was in my life at the time noticed I was just not as angry. And I didn't fight it. I wasn't in a weeding battle with my anger the way we can get around when we don't like something. Making friends, integrating with deeper part of ourselves makes a difference. And being gentle with ourselves as we're getting better at the practice. My son was born tone deaf, completely tone deaf. We'd be in the car with the radio on, and he'd be singing along, and he wasn't even close. And he was having so much fun singing out, and we never told him, not once. Just let him be. So around the area, at time he turned around 12, he came in and said, "Dad, I want to learn the guitar and become a rock and roll star like you." I didn't tell him I wasn't. So he started practicing his guitar. When he let me, I would tune it for him, so at least there was that. And he'd sing along with it. And he practiced and he practiced. He practiced an unbelievable amount of hours. And 2 years later, he comes down, says, "I wrote a song." And he plays us this song after he lets me tune his guitar. And he's hitting some of the notes. Not all of them, but even the ones he's missing, he's not missing by a mile. And the song was pretty good. And then 10 years later, and this is important that it was 10 years, and the reason it is because so we get impatient. We want results so quickly, at things we're not good at yet. Well, why don't I see these changes? I'm doing this spiritual practice. Why don't I see these changes in my life right now? Well, it's taken me 25 years to get where I am, 30 at this point. So 10 years later, I go to a gig of my son's where there's over 200 people there singing his songs as his band's playing, and Sony Records has contacted him because they think he's got something. From tone deaf. So it doesn't matter your starting point. It doesn't matter what you think you're good at or not good at. It's, are you willing to put in the practice? Because he was. Boy, did he ever put in that practice. And recognizing what the practice is, right? Befriending our weeds instead of trying to get rid of them. Because every one of them, everything you can think about yourself that you think is, not great, that you want to get rid of, I promise you, there is a flower there. There's another side to it. Frustration. If you find yourself frustrated, the opposite of that is not patience, it's care. Frustration is simply care done badly. You don't get frustrated about stuff you don't care about. And so be with the care. Be with the side of the coin that can flourish. You see what I'm saying here? Whatever it is, there's a side of the coin. There's a side of whatever it is you're looking at in yourself that you think, this isn't so great. Well, yes it is. You just haven't reached where the greatness in it is. There's a saying that we are not confronted by anything that we don't have the resources to deal with, to be with, to overcome, to make into something beautiful. That's also true for every trait you've got. When I was a youngster, I was diagnosed with ADD. And they didn't, this is before them figuring out there were drugs for this and everything, thank God. And somewhere along the end, everybody was like, man, you have ADD. Look at you bouncing off the walls. You have ADD. You have ADD. And for a while, I thought, did I? And what does that really mean? And then I recognized one day that all they were telling me is that I couldn't concentrate on what I found uninteresting. That actually, the things I find interesting, I can concentrate on all day, as long as I'm interested. And so I found for myself what was interesting. Instead of worrying about ADD and trying to control it and do this with it, I went an entirely other direction. What truly interests me? And if I didn't do that, I would not be before you today. Because nothing has led my life more than my interest in consciousness, more than my interest in what is spirit, what is God, what is really behind the veil. These are the questions that have driven my life since I was a kid. And that's what interested me. So if you discover what grabs your attention that much and follow it, it will guide your life. It will absolutely guide you to where is the highest and best for you. And so don't get stuck thinking that any trait you have is against you, holding you back. There's something in the cards you've been dealt that is the exact cards you need to become the best of who you can be in this life. That's what's true about it. You know, there's a poem by Goethe where he talks about commitment and how once you are committed, I'm not getting this is a paraphrase. Once you are committed, all sense of providence moves in your direction. Things you can't even imagine come forward for you in ways that are beyond your ability to see. That's what's possible. Whatever cards you've been dealt, it's the commitment that matters. It's the intention that matters. It's what draws you, what pulls you to a life that is beyond your imagination. That's what's possible for each and every one of us at every step in our lives. That's what I know for myself, and that's what I know for each and every one of you. Thank you. I love you.